Hello and welcome to my review for the 2018 film Mortal Engines. And I'm probably going to go with some really clickbaity title here, which revolves around you needing to go and see this film. If I didn't, I probably should have. So before I even get into Mortal Engines, I'd like to kind of build up the suspense a little bit of whether I like the film or not when I do a review. Right out of the gate, I love this film and I want to implore you to go and see it, because I'm so worried that this film is going to be trampled by Aquaman, by Into the Spider-Verse, by Mary Poppins Returns, and it will be. You know, my worry is justified. This film is going to get fucking flattened by those movies, and it's going to be hurt by the no doubt mediocre reviews that have already started coming in, and are only going to continue to roll in once the film comes out wide in America in a couple of days at the recording of this video. And I just really, it's another John Carter, Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets situation for me. Although I prefer this film to those two. Those were two kind of big sci-fi films with a big budget that took a chance, did something original. Although John Carter and Valerian were both adapted from previous source material, as was Mortal Engines, but took a chance on adapting something that wasn't already a pre-established IP, something they could bank on, something that they knew was going to make money, but they put a lot of money into it anyway, and created this huge, fun, epic movie that isn't perfect, and so everyone's going to dump on it because that's the thing to do these days, and so no one's going to really go and see it, and it's going to really hurt it, and we'll see less and less of films like this. So I implore you to go and check it out, give it a chance, give it a shot, especially if you're one of those Cineworld or Odeon Limitless Unlimited members. It's not going to cost you anything extra, just 2 hours of your time to go and watch a really fun, really big, visually stunning movie. So Mortal Engines is adapted from a series of books. It adapts the first book in the series. I forget the author's name off the top of my head, called Mortal Engines, and it is set at some unspecified time way into the future, where we as a society now are known as kind of the Ancient Ones, and we destroyed each other, and it was the 60-minute war, they call it. All it took was 60 minutes for a what was the term? I forget the actual term now. There's a specific word, like what is it, like quantum or some kind of weaponry that was developed that is kind of even more destructive than nuclear weaponry. Not quantum, no, it definitely wasn't that, but it was something that's some kind of energy. It really bugs me that I forgot that, but it's this super weapon that was created, and we just wiped each other out. We wiped it all. It was gone, and so humanity rebuilt itself, and we now follow in Mortal Engines a world in which there are traction cities, huge literal cities on wheels, traveling through the wilderness known as the Outlands. I mean, it is crazy. I saw the trailer for this and I thought, what is this? You know, it's just crazy. And I think if you're going to go into this film and think, well, would that really work physically to have a city like that on wheels? Is it really worth all the energy? Like, you're not going to enjoy the film. You really can't bog yourself down with details like that, with would it work in the real world, details like that. They put a lot of time and care into this. They actually had like an engineer who was working on the film to kind of get some of it at least halfway right as far as the actual structure of these like moving cities and things like that. And the story follows a few characters. We have Hester Shaw, who is this mysterious young woman at the beginning of the film, who is making her way to London. London is the focused and prime predator city in this story, and it's, it has bits and pieces of old London. St. Paul's Cathedral, I believe, is on the top, at the very it's kind of like the pinnacle of the whole city, and then down in the depths we have like pieces of underground stations and things like that. And I loved how it felt like it had a class system, kind of the posh, kind of nicer buildings at the top, and then down in the kind of the bowels of London we have all the kind of the machinery and the molten stuff going on, and the kind of the lower class and all that, and they literally like hunting down these smaller cities on wheels and kind of harpooning them and bringing them in and using their energy, kind of feeding itself. Just really, really cool, big scale stuff. And one thing I'll say about the look of the film, I'm kind of going off on a tangent here without talking about the story, but one thing I have to say about the look of the film is that it is so cool. Really bad way to describe it. Man, it's so fucking cool. And what I loved is that this isn't a CGI fest. It is not a CGI fest. Anything where we're seeing the city, where we're seeing kind of, you know, maybe some of the environments and things like that. Yes, we're seeing a lot of CGI, but man, they did so much practical, and you can tell it is a tangible, big-scale science fiction, fantasy, adventure film where you can tell how many sets they must have built. A lot, you know, and I think I read it was like 120 sets they created, and they did this over in New Zealand. This is from the makers of the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit trilogies. So we have Peter Jackson, Fran Walsh, and Philippa Boyens, the writing team who wrote the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit movies, writing this film, producing this film. The director is Christian Rivers, who started out as a 17-year-old kid right out of school working for Peter Jackson on Braindead, one of his early films in the 90s, doing the storyboards. Did the storyboards for all the Lord of the Rings movies, did visual effects supervising, did kind of second unit directing on the Hobbit movies, and I believe also Pete's Dragon, the recent Disney remake. And so now he's kind of stepped up to be the director of his own film, and I think he did a great job. You can tell that an artist made this film from the way it looks visually. And anyway, back to the story. Again, I can ramble on this film for a long time, and it's hard to really know which direction to go in, but the story follows a number of characters, as I already said, particularly Hester Shaw. Now, this is a woman who's making her way to London. At the beginning of the film, we see a big chase sequence between London and this small kind of mining town village on wheels. And Hester Shaw, this mysterious woman with a scarf over her nose, all you can see is the eyes and kind of the wild hair, very feral kind of look and feel to this character who doesn't really say anything in the first 10-15 minutes of the film. And she's clearly on a mission to get to London and to find and kill the one of the figureheads of London, Valentine, played by Hugo Weaving. And so she gets on London, and she makes an attempt on his life, and then flees London, not before she's chased down by a man called Tom, who is a young British historian. I don't know if they even classify themselves as British, actually, considering it's London, but they're kind of somewhere else in the world at this point, and they kind of allude to the fact that, we never should have come to Europe. So the geography is all scattered all over the place, and the world is a much different place. In fact, they remark at one point the old, well, the world map that we have now, the old world, the ancient world. They go, wow, really, like North America? Like, so, you know, to them it's completely different. But regardless, you know, most of the people in London have British accents, and Tom is from London. He lives there, and he is a historian, and kind of has all this old technology back when the 60-minute war took place, and also kind of relics from the past. There's like a cute gag where we see a smartphone, like, you know, and they find like they're kind of going through all the scavenging all the bits and pieces. There's a toaster, like, wow, look at this thing. It's like, it's in the best condition ever. You know, it's like the spring doesn't work, but the springs never work, you know. That kind of stuff is cute and fun, and thinking about what would happen if we do all nuke ourselves to hell, and in 1,000 years' time someone finds all random things and thinks that they're really important when they're just completely everyday, mundane objects to us. But just by the fact of the separation of time and the differences, it seems like something much more interesting and exciting. So Tom, the historian, he grew up wanting to be an aviator, but his families were historians. They died when a section of the city collapsed, and so he's kind of an orphan, and works on his own kind of with the history. He's very interested in that kind of stuff. But he ends up in an altercation where he chases Hester Shaw, and they both end up getting ejected from the city and are left for dead in the Outlands. And so he's never been there before. Hester has kind of lived her life kind of out in the wild, so to speak. And so we have these two characters who are very different people thrust into an adventure, and now they've got to get back to London by way of avoiding kind of getting killed and sold along the way. And there's all sorts of great locations they go to. We really explore the world that this story takes place in. Great world building, great visuals, but I really loved the story. And I've seen, I hate to do this so much and say, well, people have been saying this, but it seems a lot of people have been saying that the story just wasn't good enough for them, that they weren't gravitating towards the characters. Even Connie, who, you know, obviously she went to see it with me, she thought it was visually stunning. Those were her words, but she wasn't grabbed enough by the story. So that's, you know, as perspective, I believe is going to be held by most people. But I was really into it. I loved this character of Hester Shaw. And the actress who played her is just fantastic. She's from Iceland, I believe. Has a very unique look to her, and gives a really emotional but kind of restrained performance, in the sense that she's a character who is holding her emotions in as much as possible and not trying to. She's trying not to let her guard down in front of this guy Tom. And I really like the actor who played him too, and he's just very kind of likable. The characters are very likable. There's a character in the film who is essentially a zombie kind of monster who has a terrifying appearance and is just almost like the Terminator. And by the end of the film, you grow to kind of love him a little bit. At least I did, and I found his character to be perhaps the most effective part of the entire film, and his arc to be the most moving, in fact. Like, it brought me to tears almost. The kind of the, the tears were kind of building under the eyelid there. They weren't quite falling down my cheek, but they almost got there. And when we meet cool characters along the way, there's Anna Fang, who's this Korean, I believe. I mean, I think she's like a musician. She's kind of does all sorts of artistic things in the real world. And she plays this character who's kind of very much a badass, kind of rogue, and is a very cool character who you might say is a little bit one-dimensional. I could totally go along with that, but I liked her. I thought she was cool, and she was badass, and she seemed to be the character that the person that Hester could be if she didn't have so much baggage in her past and was so kind of guarded all the time. This Anna Fang was someone who was a bit more kind of exuberant with her kind of self-assuredness and toughness and bravery. And this is a war film in that sense, and it's about Valentine, Hugo Weaving's character, getting up to some kind of unsavory things in London and basically wanting to go to war with the static cities, which are cities, just normal cities. And there's this huge settlement beyond this great shield wall, and I loved that location. It was just breathtaking when you first see it for the first time. And so, towards the third act, we're in a war movie, and it's this huge, big, epic scale, war, and I loved it. I don't know what it was about this film. I think that visually it just spoke to me so much. And often, if a film does kind of tick all those boxes for me of things I like to see in kind of adventure movies, little things like maybe it's a bit too cheesy, or maybe the story isn't as original as something else, they don't matter as much. But I was engaged with the characters, I was engaged with the story, I was getting all amped up for this fight at the end, and I was moved by things here and there, and I enjoyed some of the cheesy one-liners as well. I mean, there's a great line. I don't know if I should spoil it. No one cares. No one's going to go see this bloody film anyway. There's a scene where Hugo Weaving's character, Valentine, he's kind of talking to the mayor of London, who's kind of opposing what Valentine's trying to do in going to war. And Valentine says to the mayor, he says, "You're a dinosaur." And the mayor says, "Well, what does that make you?" And he says, "Me? I'm the meteor." And I just thought that was great. Cheesy, it's a one-liner, but it kind of harkened back to some of the night. I got a teeny bit of an Independence Day vibe with this. Big scale action movie, cheesy one-liners, you love it anyway, that kind of thing. And this felt like the closest you're going to get to a live-action Miyazaki film. Like, it had all the hallmarks of a Miyazaki story, with the aviation, with the flight, with the gorgeous scenes in the clouds, and then just the moving cities themselves, called back things like Howl's Moving Castle, just the general look of everything. You could call it steampunk, but the director, Christian Rivers, was very careful to say that we want to avoid doing steampunk per se. It's not kind of Victorian era stuff kind of being used. It's more its own thing, but it absolutely has the aesthetic of steampunk, where we have this kind of barren like landscape, and then this very technological kind of contrast to that in these moving cities. And we have there's a subplot involving a couple of other characters that I could totally, again, understand people saying was maybe dragging the film out too much, but I enjoyed those characters. The little kind of side story in London with Valentine's daughter, and the other character, the other guy, Bev or something was his name. But I mean, it's just a classic big scale adventure movie. And I absolutely loved everything about it, and I can't wait to see it again. I thought the score was great. I think some of the action scenes were awesome. I will say, actually, the action scenes, as far as the kind of hand-to-hand fighting combat stuff, No, I will agree with anyone who says that those weren't done as well as they could have been. We get into a lot of that shaky camera stuff, and it was really disappointing. There's a couple of good bits, you know, where it was like, oh, that was cool fight sequence and like nice little bits of choreography, but a lot of it is a little bit kind of washed over in the kind of shaky, fluid cam, which might be an effect from the 3D. We saw it in 3D and in IMAX, and I will even give this film the compliment that it is probably one of the best films I've ever seen in 3D, purely because of the fact that I didn't notice it. You know, I'm not a fan of 3D at all, but it was the only time we could see it because it wasn't showing until the evening in 2D, and we didn't have the time to kind of be there in the evening where the cinema is. So we watched it in the 3D IMAX, huge screen, great sound, and the 3D just kind of rolled over me. I completely forgot about it if it weren't for the fact that the glasses were making my nose hurt a little bit. So it was unintrusive as far as the 3D is concerned. That might be a fail for them as far as the 3D is concerned, but it didn't distract me at all, which was great. So I can't wait to see it in 2D in the way that I prefer to see movies, and I'm only glad that Peter Jackson didn't enforce his high frame rate kind of experiment from the Hobbit films onto this one, because that was just abysmal. So I think the film looked great, and just had some and I loved the story and how we keep dipping into flashbacks and getting more of the kind of the overall story, the overall mystery kind of painted out as the film goes on. And again, it's nothing you haven't seen before. There's nothing really super original about the story. The only thing you could call original about it is kind of just the world building and just the way that the things look. But I mean, even then, some things are very reminiscent of other things. So, you shouldn't really go into it expecting your mind to be blown with something you've never seen before. But at the same time, this idea of these cities on wheels is something I've never seen before. And I personally love, like, I was going to say big scale. I love gargantuan scale stuff. I love things that are so big they couldn't even possibly conceivably exist, and they make it a reality in this film. And it's something that I think as a kid I would have absolutely adored. I think kids will love this, and in that sense it's kind of family friendly. It isn't too kind of extreme or adult or anything like that. There's the violence isn't that heavy. But the stakes are high. The stakes are so high. And another criticism I read was, oh, the villain's motivations weren't entirely clear. And I'm just like, Jesus Christ. Like, sometimes we just need a villain in a film. And I do think the villain's motivations were fairly clear. Valentine, it is hinted, came from nothing and kind of very cleverly manipulated and kind of wormed his way into London, became a popular figurehead and in a place of power and able to pull off what he was trying to do all along. And he believes that the kind of the predator cities and the static cities can't coexist with one another. And it's kind of alluded to that basically the cities on wheels are kind of cast out into the outlands, the wilderness of the world, and the static cities live behind the big shield wall, and so that they're kind of segregating themselves from each other, and the people out in the outlands are kind of the outcast. Like, we'll just shove those out with the vermin, And so he feels very much like he's probably been mistreated in that sense, and that it's only right and just that he destroys that barrier between the two and takes full control of everything with large-scale weaponry. And it just shows you how history always repeats itself with that kind of absolute stupidity and arrogance and blindness to the evil that you're actually creating and the lives that you're destroying in doing so. And again, another thing I read was someone saying, oh, it's a bit too political for me. How can it not be political when you're dealing with these communities and these societies and kind of trying to kind of put in the viewer's mind where people stand? You have to have some political edge to that. Even Star Wars was political to a degree. And I also loved that I didn't know anyone in the film apart from Hugo Weaving, and I later learnt that the undead character, the zombie Shrike, who again highlighted the movie for me, was played by Stephen Lang. Oh my god, I love Stephen Lang. It completely made sense that he was given this great motion capture performance, and he was fantastic. But the rest of the cast, the human cast, apart from Hugo Weaving, I'd never seen any of them before. And I loved that. Oh my god, to get lost in a world that I've never seen before, with characters and faces I've never seen before. If it was full of all these famous faces, it would be, you're thinking of other films, other characters, to a degree you can forget about. You can see Harrison Ford in another film and not think about Han Solo, but you know, there's still some baggage there. And for this movie, there was none of that, and I loved that. So I just felt like this was such a gamble, and it's a gamble that is probably almost definitely not going to pay off for Universal, who are behind the film, because I just can't see this film succeeding. But another thing I really appreciated was that it doesn't try to sequel bait. It doesn't try to create a cinematic universe. It doesn't kind of, you know, hit you with a mid-credit scene to kind of hint at what's coming next. It completely exists as its own separate standalone story, and it works just fine like that. So for me, it's going to be a film I'm going to go back to again and again and again and enjoy over and over and over again and not feel like it's incomplete. I would love to have seen the rest of the series done, but it just seems like an impossibility because they just released it at a time when all these other films are coming out that are already based on marketable, bankable stars and franchises. You know, Aquaman, DC, people are going to show up no matter what. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is getting rave reviews. People are going to be all over that, especially kids, Christmas time. Mary Poppins Returns, that's going to be the family film that's going to drive all the families into the cinema. And then you've got Mortal Engines, which is just kind of there. And I don't think really is going to grab people very much, which is a real shame. So, but I'm glad that it happened. I'm glad that it was done. And I'm glad that all the people involved decided to put up the money for something that really wasn't, I don't think, a surefire bet as far as making money back on it was. So I love that films like this exist, but I am kind of a little sad that they're going to happen less and less. And I implore you to go and watch it, because I didn't do that when I watched Valerian last year, and I loved it. You know, again, not perfect, but it just, I really enjoyed everything about it, and it was just so much fun and things I'd never seen before. But with Mortal Engines, I enjoyed it just that bit more. There's just something about it, the aesthetic, that I love, I think. And yeah, it's not the most amazing story. It's not a perfect film by any stretch of the imagination. And I think most people are going to be very middle of the road on it, but I implore you to check it out anyway. I mean, if I was to get like, you know, this video will probably get like 100 views or something like that. If every person who watches this video was to go out and check out Mortal Engines when they weren't going to anyway, you know, without hearing my kind of words of recommendation, it still wouldn't make a blind bit of difference. And that's not going to happen anyway. You know, I'd be lucky if one person saw this video and went, okay, I'll go and see it. But if they did, then I'd be happy that someone else gave it a shot and didn't decide to either skip it or didn't even know that it existed in the first place. So it's safe to say that I really liked Mortal Engines to a huge degree. Like, this was such a surprise, and going in with such a low set of expectations certainly helped, but I don't think that's the key. I don't think that it's just the fact that I was surprised that it was good. I actually loved it, and it's in my head. I can't get rid of it. It's staying with me, and I'm just, yeah, just some really great moments. And overall, just and the pacing, I think, was so well done. Just from moment to moment, I was just, there was multiple times in the film where I almost turned to Connie and said, I'm fucking loving this. But I didn't want to distract her or anything, and I didn't want to distract myself either. But there was those moments where I just felt so excited. I wanted to just grab someone and say, this film's great, you know? And that's what I fucking live for, to see films like this that get me excited, that get me amped up, that move me a little bit, and give me a great time in the cinema. This is what it's all about for me. You know, you can call it a guilty pleasure. I'm not guilty in the slightest about loving this film and kind of dying on the hill of championing it as a really good film at the very least. You know, I'm not going to say this is a masterpiece, but I loved it so much that I can say to people, you really should give it a chance. And I felt that way again about films like John Carter and Valerian, which I don't think got their kind of fair, you know, their fair go of things. I don't think Mortal Engines will either. And so it's a shame. But regardless, I'm one very happy moviegoer who was completely surprised by this incredible adventure story that just took me to another world, and I really enjoyed the ride and want to go back as soon as possible. So, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Leave your thoughts on the film down below if you have seen it. And I'd love to kind of get some discussions going if you want to chat about it and kind of dive into things. And yeah, there's probably more to discuss perhaps, or maybe there's I've kind of covered everything ad nauseum and no one's going to want to talk about it. We'll see. But I knew that this was going to be at least a 20-minute video, and I probably could have stretched it to 30 to 40 minutes. I mean, I could talk about the things that actually happen in the film and actually go into specifics about things that I loved. But I don't want to spoil anything just in case anyone is, thinking about watching the film or has been swayed, which would be great. But again, don't go in expecting this amazing, incredible masterpiece just because I loved it so much. It's just my personal opinion. I'm saying that it's a film that I really liked it. It's difficult because you say that a film is great and you loved it and people expect it to be like, Shawshank Redemption or something. There's a difference between a great film and a film that you love. It doesn't have to be great, It's all about personal preference. Again, it's all about what you put into it. You can't be me sitting in the cinema watching this film because you don't have my experiences, I don't have yours. And so it's, like a great filmmaker once said, I can only ever make 50% of a film. The other 50% is made in the mind of the person who sits down in the cinema and watches it. You always bring your own experiences, your own kind of feelings and tastes into a film, and how you bring it in and how it forms into the fully 100% idea of this film in your mind. So, yeah. Ramblefest over. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
It's alright by me. Apart from the fact he throws cans of Carlin into a tree. Yeah, he's really cool. Yeah, he's really cool. But he's not quite as cool as you.